So that's why we have the British spelling of organizations in honor of Tom. Anyways, my colleague Lindsay Beauregard is the moderator for this session. She's the managing editor of MRO at Aviation Week Network for America. I feel like that's the wrong title for you.
Yeah,
did you get a promotion?
I did, yeah.
Lindsay just got a promotion. Please inform us your new title. What is it?
Managing editor
of
you
MRO.
really are? Yep.
Great. Okay. And then we also have Arun Chhabra, CEO of 8tree, and Mark Schultz, the founder of Digital Aircraft. So with that, I will hand it over to Lindsay and enjoy the session.
Great. Thanks for the introduction, Jackie. So as she said, we have experts here from 8tree and Digital Aircraft. And we would like to kick things off with a little bit of audience participation. So I think we'd like to get a little bit of a gauge on who is focused on implementing technology products, tools, or platforms versus implementing technology workflows. So by a show of hands, how many of you are focused on technology products, tools, or platforms? Okay, so looks like most of you. And then how many of you are focused on implementing innovative technology workflows? Okay, so a little more on the platform side here. Great, and then we also kind of want to expand on this a little bit with an audience poll. So we'd like to gauge what is the biggest challenge area for aerospace companies in implementing new technologies. So you can participate by using Slido. The instructions are up on the screen. And while we're waiting on those results, I'd love to talk to Arun and Mark a little bit. Maybe you guys can share your expertise areas when it comes to technology. So Arun, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks, Lindsay. So I'm with a company called 8tree, and we essentially make smart inspection tools. These are defined around solving very chronic pain points within the aerospace aviation industry, and designing them in a way that they completely digitalize the end user workflow from start to finish for that pain point.
Great. And then Mark, how about yourself?
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. I unfortunately have 40 years of experience in the aviation industry, and I'll break it up into two pieces. And those two pieces are being a consumer of technology, where I worked for manufacturers and airlines, and then I transitioned over to being a deliverer of technology. And I've delivered systems and solutions to maybe 250 different airlines, MROs, and organizations over the last 20 plus years. And so in the last few years, I've been focusing on being an evangelist for digital transformation and really doing consulting and implementations in that space.
Great. Well, it looks like we have pretty tentative, great results here. So by and large, it looks like skepticism or unwillingness to adapt to new ways of working is the major challenge area, followed by integrating technology with existing systems. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Does that reflect your experience, what you've seen with customers or with companies that you've worked with?
Well, I personally have spent many, many years standing in front of leaders and executives, having conversations with them about the implementation of digital technology with a great deal of skepticism. And maybe I'll just capture it in one example, though, on why I think things have changed. I know it's a challenge for most people to just answer the question, but approximately 2 years ago, I stood at the podium, I think it was in Bangkok, and I did a presentation about why things have changed and why now is time to implement digital in this space, and why regulators are willing to accept that, because people were still saying just 2 years ago that regulators were having difficulty accepting the implementation of digital in place of paper processes. All right, and the year before we went into the pandemic, I flew about 480,000 miles that year all over the world, and that meant sleeping on airplanes 2 or 3 nights a week in order to be able to do that. And I can personally attest from firsthand knowledge that I saw, many organizations using paper, at that time. And this was 2 years ago. Fast forward to today, things have really changed. And there really are, in my opinion, no obstacles that exist other than the challenges with legacy and implementation and all those normal challenges that we have with implementation of technology. But those key things that we always were looking at as to whether or not we would be able to successfully implement technology, were things like software and internet and technology, cost-effective technology, and data, and really acceptance by the regulators. And all those things have aligned to the place where really it's up to us. It's up to these people in this room, these innovators that are here today, to charge forward with success. And I know that it's a challenge that we have, and people are not willing to accept that. And we can talk some more about that. But really, the time is now where things have aligned and enabling us to be successful in this space.
And Arun, what are your thoughts on the poll results?
So first of all, I have to start off by apologizing relative to Mark's wealth of experience. We are relative newcomers to the aerospace aviation market.
He's very humble. We've had long conversations about his experience.
We only have about a decade of experience in aerospace aviation, and I say that honestly and genuinely, right? I mean, there's a wealth of experience here in the room, and the industry is such that because of regulations and safety track record that needs to be maintained, it requires a lot of experience to really embed yourself and become the fabric of that industry. Having said that, I think it's a multivariate problem, right? So there's a regulatory aspect that is driven by an intense focus on safety, right? So the resistance at times to adopting new methods is not baseless. It's based on good intentions. However, I think there's the other aspects of it, which are also that there's an organizational resistance, and the organizational resistance has been referred to a few times earlier in today's conference, and it boils down to this generational shift that we're seeing in the workplace, especially in aviation maintenance, for example, where you have the current experts are people who have, as they call it in industry vernacular on the shop floor, they have calibrated eyes and calibrated fingers, right? So that's how they're quickly able to assess whether something needs to be addressed or not. And as they're retiring, there's this big gap that everyone's worried about. And we're talking about a workforce that has been, as someone mentioned this morning, they're born and brought up on gadgets. So how do we make the industry interesting to them to join? And then it's for the employers to figure out how do they make their systems more attractive to bringing on such people. And that's what I mean by, I think it's sort of one of those puzzles that's wrapped up in an enigma, right, because of the number of sort of problems it poses.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I mean, obviously, the MRO workforce, I would say stereotypically, but if you look at the demographics, it really is skewed towards an older workforce. The whole workforce challenge thing is something that's coming up as a huge topic in the industry. But do you think that implementing new technologies is going to be something that will help attract younger generations to the industry or bring them back if they've left during the pandemic? What's your perspective on that?
So my take, if I might, Mark, is it's got to be very simple, and it almost goes back to, think about when you open up a new app on your phone, right? Very quickly, we make the assessment of whether that app is going to work for us or not. Does that workflow of the app, does the user interface, does it resonate with us? And I think that's going to be the challenge with technologies. It goes back to your original poll question, right? Are we attracting the new workforce with a batch of cool tech, or are we trying to attract them with cool tech that comes together in a unified manner to work seamlessly and to solve chronic problems? I think something like that resonates much more, because now it's not an isolated instance of one gadget or one piece of software, but they can see the involvement they have, the impact they have on the entire industry, for instance.
Yeah, I think absolutely. We have a younger generation that's coming up and is expecting to have the technology that they have in their gaming systems, and and having the user interfaces and the things that were talked about just now from Amadeus. And so I think that's definitely an element of what we're dealing with. But I wanted to add one other thing to that. Is that COPA, they focused on the change management challenges that they had, right? And we all know that one of the successful elements of digital transformation is change management, successful implementation of technology. Now, I can personally attest from experience. I've seen some of the most resistant people say, "I'm not going to use that technology," be the most avid supporters and training other people once they see the success and the benefits from what they're doing, right? And so I think that it's part of the change management process and part of the education that we have, and rolling out of that technology and making certain that people understand it, because I think people inherently want their job to be easier. And I have personally seen the most senior people in an organization that were the most resistant to change grab a mobile device and use it because it made their job easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And so, that kind of covers the number one result on the poll, but number two was, in terms of integrating systems. And, obviously within MRO, you've got OEM data platforms, ERP systems, MRO software, tools like yours that you have at Atri. And so, what do you think is the key to make sure that all of these tools can kind of integrate together and work seamlessly and still be secure?
I don't think it's a simple solution, and I think like the last session we were talking about, we heard about a journey of digitalization. I think we are on that journey, and that needs to encompass the workflow. We're big believers in workflows, right? Because whatever we make, whatever widget or tool or platform we make, it's really a very small piece of a very large puzzle. And where we spend a lot of time as a company is trying to figure out, okay, yes, we know the industry is interested in our little piece of the jigsaw puzzle, but wouldn't it be so much cooler if our piece could somehow interface and interoperate with all these other pieces that the customer has to use, right? Wouldn't that make their life easier? Wouldn't that make the industry run smoother? And I think that workflow comprehension is really a critical component in our eyes.
Mark, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I guess I had some conversations earlier, out in the room here regarding sort of priorities that people have in their organizations, and integration was one of the topics that immediately came up. And I guess I'll put it this way: is that of all the MROs and all of the airlines and operators and everybody I've seen, I can tell you with a 100% certainty that there are no two IT portfolios out there. All right, and since we know that, since there are no two IT portfolios out there, unless one airline started another and copied everything that they had, it just doesn't exist. And so we are faced with the integration requirement no matter what. Standards are definitely important. All right, we definitely have to have standards, for data exchange and all the different things that we do in order to be able to create success. But we have to put a focus on integration and the ability of systems to be able to work together and to play together. Okay. Now, the great presentation by the gentleman from IFS. I appreciate the fact that they say we want to put forward, one system, but they're putting forward one system in one specific area within the organization, or maybe they don't do cargo, or I don't know exactly how far their systems expand to, but they're not going to cover every system within an operation. There's going to be systems that have to be integrated with, all right? So no matter how one we want to be, there are integrations that have to occur. So if we can become a system which is more easily integrated with and can collaborate, if we, and I know there's a lot of people looking at the abilities to be able to stand up blockchain platforms and maybe digital twins, and we're talking about low code, no code kind of things, but whatever we're doing, if we can create environments where we can be more highly integrated within that IT portfolio, we're going to be more successful.
So can I just piggyback on something Marcus said? So you started talking about standards, right? And standardization is important. And let me give you an example of viscerally how we face that on a regular basis, how our customers face it. So we enable our customers to, again, digitalize their damage assessment of an aircraft. And part of that is enabling them to create digital reports based off of the digital damage inspection they did. These digital reports are submitted to the OEMs. The OEMs then sign off and aircraft damage is disposition and the aircraft is back in flight. Now, in this storyline, we've come to learn that no two customers are traditionally have been reporting damage to the OEMs in the standard way. Someone has a particular template they developed that has X number of fields. Someone has Y number of fields. The fields there may be some overlap, there may be some difference. And here the OEM is receiving hundreds, maybe thousands of these every day, right? From all across the world. And they have to go through them, their customer support teams, to figure out and then get back quickly on dispositioning those aircraft. So what we started trying to build some discussion around in the industry is, why don't we come up with a neutral standard? So for us, it's not about IP and an idea like this, right? It's about if we can standardize how damage is reported so that when it lands on the desk of Boeing, Airbus, Embraer, Bombardier, et cetera, they know what they're receiving. It's in the same format. It contains the same critical information. And it doesn't matter whether a human being is inspecting it with a mechanical gauge or they have a high-tech tool, it's always going to be the same standard. And it makes the process so much more efficient. It gets that airplane back in flight so much quicker. And yet, believe it or not, we, in all of our discussions with large MROs, large airlines, the biggest OEMs and tier one suppliers, it's literally trying to get interest on why don't we come together and standardize. It's not that easy a task.
Yeah, absolutely. And so speaking of, finding efficiencies within the workflows here, Mark, I know you've interviewed hundreds of companies about implementing new technologies, and I'm curious if you could maybe share, some of your biggest takeaways in terms of how aerospace companies are growing via technology.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So just so that some of you understand, is that a couple of years ago, I decided that I wanted to begin to leverage, digital technology to be able to promote digital transformation. What a novel idea! Use digital to promote digital. All right, and so I started, increasing and leaning into my utilization of, social media and the internet and things like that. And it fortunately positioned me well so that when the pandemic came around, that people wanted to communicate more digitally, that I was able to begin doing that more rapidly. And I had a choice at that point in time, was to pull back or to accelerate, all right? And so, just by way of introduction, over the last 18 months, I've interviewed or partnered with or worked for, somewhere between 400 and 450 different companies, and interviewing them and doing live broadcasts, on social media, primarily on LinkedIn, but I go to other platforms at the same time. But in the process of doing that, I've learned, some very interesting things. The focus was always not getting somebody onto a live broadcast with me to sell something. It was to understand their business problem that they were faced with and how they were going about helping people to solve that, through the solutions that they had, whether it be software, whether it be services. And so some things that I found out is that I started out with this program which said, let's focus on recovery in aviation. How do we help recover aviation? And what I quickly found out was there were certain companies that weren't recovering. They were actually growing very rapidly during those times. And there was others that were struggling and were doing more recovery. Now, a lot of it had to do with what their business was. If you were an airline that was traveling internationally, of course your route structure, suffered. But if you were one that was traveling domestically, you had a different problem. They were looking at what happens around me and how do I shift. Now, what were the takeaways from that? Okay, the takeaways is that how do we be resilient and how do we be flexible in looking at our surroundings and adapting what we can do within that. And I saw very clearly that there were companies that actually had record profits. About 50% of them actually had record profits during this time, because they shifted and they were resilient and they started focusing on the strategies and tactics that were required from what's happening around them. And I know some of them sound obvious, but it's like people that were shifting to cargo and they were doing main deck cargo and replacing the passenger traffic with cargo traffic, or they were looking on pandemic recovery systems, HR systems, which were taking people's temperatures, or, they shifted and were doing different things like that. Now, many of them are focusing on, that bad word, supply chain right now, okay? And so I think that what I really saw was that people looked around them, all right, and they said, what do we have to do to shift or adjust to the things that are happening around us? And how do we focus our business on growing in those areas? Now, not everybody can do that, or you say that it's difficult for me to do that. And so some didn't do as well as others, but I think resilience and flexibility and shifting were the key to success from those people that were able to grow during that time.
Sure. And, in terms of technologies, we talked a lot, I think, today in the sessions about software. But, are there certain technologies that have gained the most traction over the last year or so? What has been both of your experience dealing with the industry?
Maybe Mark, I'll let you start.
I'll
with
start,
that,
and then
given your
you
wealth
pick up.
of
Sure,
interviews that you've mentioned.
Sure, I've definitely seen some technologies that have advanced during this time, but maybe I'll put it this way: is that I think that the most successful companies, we saw this repeating theme here this morning already. Okay, John Schmidt got up and he said technology and process. Okay, they both are, they both relate to each other, right? They leverage each other, right? So technology and process. We saw Copa come up and say people, processes, and technology. Okay, all right. I absolutely believe in those things, and I'm going to add a fourth one into that, and it's belief. And we all know, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Okay, we all know that leadership, a resolute leader that says we are going to go into this and we are going to do digital transformation. This is not an option. We're going to come out the other side with success. Is is driving enthusiasm in the organization and creates belief amongst the people around them. And then having the people and leveraging the knowledge of the subject matter expertise of the people within the organization and those around you, all right, including looking at business processes which are using enabling technology, results in what I would say to be the process of digital transformation. Now, where does innovation come into that? All right, I've seen many people that say, what's the business problems that we're faced with out there, right? And I've seen emerging technologies come in a lot of different areas. You could say there's some buzzwords and things out there, but I definitely have seen people focus on what is the business problem and how do we apply, like artificial intelligence, or how do we apply the high degree of processing that we have, or, to the problem that we have to be able to create success. I've actually seen some blockchain platforms that have created success, today, and it hasn't been highly adopted in the aviation industry, but I've seen some success outside. And I wanted to bring up that one last because I want to hand this over to you, is what I want to do, okay? Is because I've had some conversations with Arun, all right? And Arun said, I've only been in the industry for 10 years. We don't have, the same knowledge or experience of everybody in here. All right, but think about this, is that many times the technologies that we're looking at come from outside the industry and they're brought in the industry, all right? And I've seen some very successful implementation of supply chain and type things implemented on the blockchain in automotive, in in package carriers right now. And they're working to try to implement some of those things within aviation aerospace. And I know that you guys basically did the same thing. You took technologies that were successful outside of aviation aerospace, and then now you're looking at how do we help solve the same problems in aviation aerospace where they haven't been solved, yet. And that's what you guys are doing right now, right?
Correct. So that's as in our current incarnation as Tree over the last decade, that's exactly what our approach has been. It's been around focusing on finding chronic pain points, right? And aerospace and aviation were our first two industries. And again, when I say focus on a specifically defined pain point, I mean hyper niche, right? So for instance, what are the mechanics on the line of an MRO faced with when they have to map dents? Whether it's one dent or a hailstorm, what does that user experience look like? And so we embed ourselves in these different industries to understand those problems over the course of a few years. And then we essentially create a purpose-built smart tool for that industry that's it's fully networked. So it's an IoT tool. It depending on the problem we're solving, it either invokes AI or ML. But essentially, ultimately, what it does is, via augmented reality and other means, our tools spit out an answer. They hide the complexity. And so that's where we try to go with the user experience. But if I were to just circle that back to a little bit to Lindsay's question about what we've seen in the last 18, 24 months now, is if I go back to that backdrop of where we come from, we created something or a suite of things that were designed to give a lot of value to the end user organization. But there were a lot of things that the end user organization started using, and some of them they were gun shy about. So let's take the fact that it's an IoT tool, and it's in the hands of your mechanics and structures engineers, and it can seamlessly communicate with your team in other parts of the world if you allow it to. There's like, well, we're not sure we want to allow it on our network, right? And I think what's happened with the pandemic is that it's brought a new perspective to those IT teams where they're much more receptive to it. And we're also seeing from our customers now. So one of our big things has always been FaceTime with our customers, right? And I don't mean the app, I mean physical face-to-face time with them. And so when we onboard new customers, we spend time training them on site, and hold their hand until they become fully proficient over the span of a couple of weeks. Well, with COVID, we were fortunate enough that our customer demand didn't go away. It slowed down a bit, but it didn't go away. And yet we weren't able to travel. And so we had to onboard, so our cargo, our products were shipping, but we couldn't ship ourselves to train. And so we noticed that customers are now very receptive, very open to remote training sessions. And we would of course invest a lot in terms of making sure that they were as seamless as possible. But then we noticed customers starting to invest in things that were really a decade ago were sort of buzzwords. And in aviation aerospace, they still hadn't made an entry. And now we're hearing big MROs talking about they've already implemented telepresence. So their mechanics on the line, their inspectors on the line, as they're doing damage work, they're communicating with us, with their other suppliers through all kinds of gadgets to be very, very real time. And I think that's maybe if there is a positive way of looking at what we've as a global community sort of endured over the last 2 years, it's things like that.
Well, as we get into our last 10 minutes or so here, I'd love to open it up to audience questions and see if anybody submit anything on Slido or if anybody would like to hear something specific from our panelists.
Reminder, you can come up to the microphone when you do have a question, but nothing just yet.
Okay, great. Well, while we wait on that, I'd like to kind of maybe a little bit forward. So as we look to the future, as we look to recovery, how do you think MRO companies can leverage technology to succeed? Either of you can answer that.
Well, I'll start off by saying that, we're all faced right now with certain really difficult problems. And I've talked to a number of MROs just in the last, week. And as a matter of fact, I talked to one of the largest MROs in the world on, I think, Wednesday of last week. And I asked him, what are your problems you're having right now? Okay. And so very relevant. They're the problems that you would expect. They're having labor shortages, right now, and they're having supply chain shortages. They're having difficulty, with expediting the processing of maybe repairs, and things like that. And so I think that it seems obvious, but the reality is that we have to implement those things to be able to create the optimizations that are necessary to be successful. If we can't get the labor, what are you going to do, right? We have to put systems and solutions in place which are going to reduce the labor of execution, the work execution labor. If we can't get parts, what are you going to do, right? One of the MRO I was talking to this week, they said they had a massive surplus of aged parts that they have to get rid of. Well, that's a definitely systemic problem from having a supply chain problem and a visibility and an integration problem from understanding, their parts levels basically and their positioning of those parts, all right? And that's a huge cost. And so he said, can you help me dispose of this surplus inventory and put better, supply chain processes in place? So, integration of the supply chain, being, critical components of that. And then another one I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, their focus was on repair management, right? They had $720 million worth of inventory, and basically they had some tremendous challenges because they were manually processing all the incoming repair orders, basically on spreadsheets and things like that. Typical problem that we all dream about solving is how do we automate that process, and give them just a small improvement of $720 million. I mean, so what can the MROs do, to be successful? We have to go back to the basics and look at the things which we've been afraid of doing for some time and take managed risks and move forward to be able to improve those things that we know we need to do to make our business successful.
Mark said it all.
Well, not really, but yeah.
Sure. Well, so I mean, you brought up supply chain and other industries. Are there lessons learned from the way that other industries have implemented, innovative technologies that aviation could take from that and use to grow and become more efficient?
I think I would go back to a couple of things that we've already sort of touched upon. And those two things are interoperability is key. And I think the best way to have it, again, resonate with each of us individually is think about buying something to use, again, a home gadget, right? And you expect it to work seamlessly with something else and it doesn't. Now, scale that up maybe 1 million times to what the industry is facing on a daily basis. I think that interoperability is really critical. So I think it's incumbent on not just the consumers of that technology, which is the aviation industry in this case, but the providers of that technology to do their best to leave plugs out there to allow other things to communicate with them. And then the second thing is what we also touched on is standardization that Mark had started talking about. If an electronic dent and buckle chart system, if the industry was to jump onto it as a standard that everyone can agree to, so that think about the efficiencies and the ROI it would have for everyone in that supply chain, not just the OEMs, but everyone submitting those reports. And it's not anything that belongs to anyone except to the industry as a whole. It's an open standard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it looks like we have an audience question.
Yeah, I like the perspective that both of you are bringing to the table here. And I've been in the airline side of the business for a very long time. And exactly the things that you're identifying, that the issues the MROs are having, the airlines still have. And it's slow, in my mind, it's slow progression. I was glad to see what COPA is doing, but I'm trying to think, so where's the value proposition? How do we get some more of this through? I know there's some talks tomorrow on ROI, but the challenge of moving an organization in that direction and demonstrate why you need to do that in a timely fashion is still a challenge. So what are some of the things you're seeing happening at some of the customers that you're talking at that doing to help move the dial?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to just say this, is that it goes back to one of the things I just said. It really goes back to leadership. And I know it's easy to say that, okay? But I'm telling you right now that I've stood in front of people a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic. I stood in front of a big company and I told them I could save you $50 million a year if you'll implement this solution. And they're like, we don't believe it. Okay, well, I'm like, just add, all you have to do is add the numbers up. Okay, you just, there's so many operations going on. And if you just have a small improvement, all right, you can achieve that. And I think we all come from this background of not believing that we can achieve these results. And what happens is that with some of the big operators and some of the airlines and MROs, we're moving so much cash that it's a less risky position to just keep spending the operating expenses than to take yourself out of that comfort zone and actually move forward to implement a change, all right? And so that's why I go back to leadership. It comes with a visionary leader. And, some of the places I've worked at in the past, they had this perspective. Here's what it was. It was think big, all right? And it was think big, take a small piece and move quickly, all right? So it's think big, but take a small chunk forward and move quickly. And the way that I can best describe that is that we need to look out on the horizon and what does this picture look like, and don't worry about that you don't have it all figured out, all right? Just move forward with the next piece that makes sense and do it quickly. And if our leaders would adopt those kind of strategies in moving forward, then the end result is that we're able to move these initiatives forward. And so I think that the pandemic has caused us all to relook at things and say, how can digital really help our operations, all right? And I think that the end result is that we need to look at that and say, how do we move our industry forward more quickly? And it comes from leadership. Now, if your leadership doesn't believe in it, you're going to have a hard time, being successful. But I put it into three categories of people that create success in an organization. One, it's the executive leaders that say, this is what we're going to do and we're moving forward, okay? Number two, it's the guy who works for him that's now been tasked with going and making something happen. And if you're not in one of those two positions, then you're probably the third. You're probably an evangelist in your organization. And I've seen digital evangelists in the organization work across an organization and with enthusiasm be able to create success and drive those things upward at that point in time. And that's really where it comes from. And so I don't know what your role and responsibility is in the organization, but you're probably in one of those three roles. And the end result is that I do believe that we all have control over the ability to be able to create success in one of those kind of roles.
I like to figure out where that $50 million worth of savings is.
In this case, it was execution in the MRO is what it was, all right? And they had so many airplanes, they had 50 bays, of MRO, and it was in a very small amount of improvement from execution in the labor and optimizing of the production plan of execution, and that's exactly where it came from. If you calculated it out over a year, it was $50 million a year in savings just by a very small improvement in the amount of labor that it took to accomplish the maintenance on 50 bays of maintenance.
So Arun, do you have any perspective on, making the business case for new technology, particularly in an industry where, they might be averse to spending things, particularly right now?
Yeah, so maybe I think Mark has laid a very, very solid foundation to it, right? Without believers in the organization, it's going to be very challenging, or it'll be a longer road, right? Because ultimately there's a groundswell of adoption, and then others who have been sitting on the sideline they'll jump on because of fear of missing out. And that's what we are starting to notice a lot. But maybe when you talk about the business case, a lot of people talk about ROI, a lot of our customers do. And we see that there, at least in our sphere of what we do, ROI can be measured in a couple of different ways. Now, there's the way that we have direct visibility into, and the industry has confirmed, which is, hey, how long does it take for someone to measure damage manually, traditionally, the way they've done it for several decades, and create a report, and that whole process? And how long does it take with new tech, such as the stuff we do? There's a metric that's clearly sort of public because everyone knows those things. There's the hidden ROI, which I believe is even bigger. So in our case, that public metric is 90% plus time savings, right? Old way versus new way. The hidden metric, which I believe every organization knows the answer, but they're not willing to divulge it because it gives insights into their inefficiencies today. But it really is about, okay, you save time there. Yes, you save labor cost. But that time you saved, how much did it save you in terms of the airplane not sitting on the ground, right? That's a much bigger magnifier of cost savings, just the labor alone. And I think from our standpoint, those are some of the key elements in ROI, again, in our small sphere of what we have visibility into.
Okay, absolutely.
So it's sort of direct and indirect ROI. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that is time for us. So before we end, I think Jackie.
Can I add one more thing? I just want to add one more last thing because I wanted to address this group because, this is a small elite group that came to the first year of this aerospace incubator, okay? And what it is it's people that are forward thinkers. It's people that are interested in innovation, people that will come out before others will. And they'll say, how do we incubate and how do we create innovation and how do we make things happen, in this group? And I think it's really important that such a group recognizes that you're amongst people that are innovators and you're thinkers that want to work together. And I've worked with some of you out here in this group actually, as well. And I've seen some of you be, really big innovators. Like for example, there's Jim Baccarosa sitting right out there, nonchalantly with his arm on the chair over there. Okay. And I saw a guy over there who had a business problem, who said, this is a problem in the industry, and he took the risk of moving forward and creating a software application which basically solved the problem, and he's out there pulling and working hard and solving problems out there. And I know every one of you have a similar kind of a case like that out there today. And I think this is a room of innovators, and I think that we should help one another, we should get to know one another, and we should, as a group, we should help people to be able to create and achieve success. And this thing will grow and grow over time. But that's the definition of an incubator. It's like a think tank. It's like a group of people that work together and to be able to foster growth and share ideas and to incubate stuff and to make it successful. And so I just really like the fact that you guys pulled this together and there's a group of people that have put themselves out there and they risk, doing this, even though maybe the group was smaller than what people had envisioned or something like that. I don't care. This is a group of people that are innovators, and it takes one person to create change. So I thank everybody for doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and thank you both for sharing your perspective with us today.
Yeah.
And thank you to the audience for your participation.
Excellent.